Hello. Hope you're well. Thanks for coming by. Happy Labor Day, September 2nd, 2024. Here in the United States, it's Labor Day. And how do most people spend Labor Day, the day that we're supposed to celebrate our toils and efforts as hardworking people? What do? We work. That's right. Hardly anything is closed on Labor Day. Americans work on the day that we're supposed to be taking days off. Welcome to the United States of America, where your worth is judged upon how hard you toil away in the corrupt system. Welcome to the United States of America. All right, forget about all that. Let's move on to something far, 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 vastly more pleasant, and that would be New Order Technique, my personal favorite New Order album. And I'm going to wrap up the New Order series after this album because everything they've done after this, not really worth talking about in my opinion. Well, maybe I'll talk about Republic now that I think about it. Republic has some brilliant moments on it. They're few and far between on that album, but maybe I'll do Republic. But Technique is my favorite. As always, I'm going to show images of the specific copy that I have, which is this US version on Quest Records, released January 24th, 1989. I will try my best to explain why this is my favorite New Order album, and I think, like most people, my opinions of this album are influenced by nostalgia. I get very nostalgic about this record. This record came out when I was a sophomore in high school, so it's a very formidable time in terms of music or anything, really, just art or anything in general. You're learning a lot about a lot when you're 15, 16 years old. And also in early 89, I was starting to get my head wrapped around acid house and even Balearic music to some extent. And that's part of the reason why I love Technique so much, why it's so fun for me, is this is a very Balearic album. They recorded it in Ibiza, which is partly to blame for its Balearic sound. And this is the one New Order album, arguably, that is the most up to this point in their career. They've done things that are far more electronic since, but up to this point in 1989, this was their most straight ahead electronic dance album. They always made an effort to put their more dancey electronic disco tracks on the 12 inches, and then their albums were more rock based. But on Technique, it's their most dancey album up to this time. It still has rock influenced tracks like All the Way and Loveless and Guilty Partner and Dream Attack. Those are pretty rock influenced, but they're also very danceable as well. This was their most dancey album up to this point. And I think, hey, good. I think they just embraced, this is when they fully embraced who they, I don't know. I don't know if saying they embraced who they were, but this was kind of the last shift in New Order's career, I think. And they're still pounding away at this sound in a way. They've never really changed 35 years later after what they were doing here. They kind of cemented who they were as a band with Technique. This was the start of it. And I think this is the best moment they've ever had in album form in their lives. Now, I'm not counting singles and 12 inches and compilations. I did the Substance compilation. I think in a lot of ways, Substance is their greatest release. And I know it's a comp, but it's so perfectly personifies, objectifies, and illustrates why New Order is a great band. In a lot of ways, Substance is the essential release for New Order. But in terms of studio albums, Technique is far and away their best. And why do I say that? I love New Order because, again, I was of an age, I was just starting to figure out how to DJ. I was starting to train myself how to mix records. I was listening to a lot of acid house, and I was still taking in all of the post-punk and punk music that had come out a decade before. It was just a very fertile time in terms of psychologically for me to be taking in so much music. And then when this album dropped, In a lot of ways, Technique is one of the first house albums ever released. Now, obviously, again, it has a lot of rock tunes, these two in particular, and this and this, but in a lot of ways, this is like one of the very first house albums. This is a very disco album. This is New Order in full on disco form. Again, they've made albums that are far more disco than this, but they've never made an album better than this. I think this was the first time they were embracing full on disco for an album. And God, it's so good. I mean, they still were great songwriters. Bernard Sumner's lyrics were still really good. I think his lyrics have gone so far down the shitter since Republic that it's just embarrassing. Listening to his tracks now and his lyrics now, it's just the sound of someone who doesn't give a shit anymore. This is the last album that New Order did, I think, where Sumner's lyrics were pretty damn good. Peter Hook's bass is all over the place here. I don't think it was as prominent as he wanted it to be, but it doesn't matter because this record is just their best. It is the one album in their entire catalog, and I know this is subject for debate. I understand this, but this is my channel and I get to have my opinions on this channel. This is the one album in their entire catalog where there is not one single track of filler. Every song on here is a killer. I think it's sequenced perfectly. I mentioned in past New Order videos that I've done that sometimes I have an issue with how they sequenced their tracks, how they ordered them. I always thought that this track should have been over here and then that track should have been back here. You know, if they had been better at the carpentry and placing things in certain positions and areas and the songs in certain different spots, I think the album would flow better. They didn't always do that perfectly, in my opinion, but on Technique, they did. Everything just comes together. It's a very fluid album. Every song just runs into each other perfectly. This is such a good album. It is perfect in every way, in my opinion. New Order at their absolute insane peak of their powers. Late 80s, perfection. They had hit it. They had hit their stride. They would never get any better. They hit their absolute peak. And I remember when this album came out, I think it was more warmly received in Europe. It wasn't so warmly received here in the United States because it was mainly electronic. And in the United States, at least at that time, general audiences had a real hard time accepting electronic music as rock music, if that makes any sense. They just weren't really ready to grasp it. I don't know. And I know this for sure because I was there living it. People just didn't want their rock music mixed with electronic music. They didn't want it. They didn't like it. They didn't appreciate it. You could read it in the reviews. Technique was not a well-reviewed album at the time. Here in the States, I think it was better reviewed in Europe. But here it did take a certain amount of shit for being too electronic. But that is exactly why I loved it. It was totally electronic. I mean, not totally. You know, obviously it did have guitars and Peter Hook was still there. And there's some real drumming on here. You hear Morris's drums on here, but for the main part, this is a very electronic album, and all the fucking better for it. Technique is a glorious record. I listen to this album to this day, and I am profoundly moved by it. Just like I was 35 years ago, and it's insane to think that this record has been out for over 35 years. But for all of these reasons, this is why it is my personal favorite New Order album. It came out at a time where I was 16 years old, where Acid House was just percolating. It was just starting. We were just getting our minds wrapped around this new sound. It was like a whole new movement. And in my opinion, Acid House and the rave scene is the last significant musical movement we've had in our culture, in our global culture. There was punk and there was rave, and then there's really been nothing since. If you want to count grunge in there, okay, but grunge was happening right around the time of rave, and I was never a grunge fan. To me, rave is the last significant musical movement we've had on this planet Earth. So when you're in the middle of that and you're there from the beginning and you have albums like this come out, it really changes your life. It changes the way you listen to records. And Technique is one of those albums that completely changed my view on not just the music itself, but changed my view on how I listen to records, how I'm able to translate electronics being mixed with rock music. It just really wasn't done back here at this time. It was here and there in spots and starts in very minimal ways, but this album was just blatantly mixing rock and disco. And that shit just didn't happen back then, not like this. And for all of these reasons, this is why Technique is my favorite New Order album, and it always will be. It is a beautiful record. As I look at the track listing, again, I don't think there's a single bad song on here. No filler whatsoever, none. I forgot to mention too, before I get into the track listing, my very first concert I ever went to was New Order, Technique, the Technique tour. I saw them in Portland, Oregon in May of 1989. Throwing Muses opened for them. I always thought that was a weird pairing. I was never a Throwing Muses fan, but it is what it is, or it was what it was. I saw New Order in May of 1989 in Portland, Oregon at the Civic Auditorium. It is now called the Keller Auditorium, but back then it was called the Civic Auditorium. And my friend Mike and I went and saw New Order. It was our first show we ever saw, both of us. So again, another huge reason why Technique is one of my favorite albums and by far the best New Order album. Another piece of nostalgia helping me along in that thinking. Now, I will say New Order did not sound great that night. They seemed pissed off and annoyed with each other, and I think it's common knowledge that the band never really got along that well with each other, and it certainly seemed like it. They certainly seemed to not appreciate each other's company. They were just sick to death of each other. They didn't play for very long. I think they played for about an hour, maybe a little longer than that. They basically did most of the tracks from here. And they did the hits, they did Blue Monday. They did Touched by the Hand of God. I'll never forget the only thing that Barney said during the show in terms of talking or interacting with the audience. They were getting ready to play Touched by the Hand of God. He said, we're going to play Touched by the Hand of God. This is a good song. That was it. That's all he ever said. Total disinterest in the audience. You could almost see them turning their shoulder to the audience. They just had very little interest in being entertaining. But that's part of the charm of New Order. They're grumpy bastards. Not a great show, but at any rate, it was my first concert I ever saw in my life. Now, the track listing. Fine Time, the opening single from the album, pure disco. Hardly any words or lyrics in this one. The lyrics you do get, it just seems to be a song about Barney enjoying the fruits of having a much younger woman at his disposal. And what man doesn't appreciate that? All the Way and Loveless are two of probably the most rock and roll tracks on here, maybe the most classic New Order type of sound you get. Both beautiful songs, Round and Round, one of their greatest singles. I'll get to that. Fantastic song. Guilty Partner, another one of the more rock-oriented songs. Great song. Run, a song they would later get sued over, and I'll get into that. Mr. Disco is very self-explanatory. Vanishing Point, that's the one song on the album that I have always thought should be a single. The best song on the album. Pure Dance, pure New Order, one of the most classic New Order songs, Vanishing Point. How that was never a single, I don't know. Maybe they thought about it, but God, what a great song. Absolutely one of the best songs they've ever done. Vanishing Point. And Dream Attack. Just awesome stuff. Another rock and roll style track from New Order. A beautiful way to end this perfect album. Technique. You know it. You love it. You know I'm right. This is their best song. This is their best album. Their best song, their best album. It's all here. Everything that makes New Order great. You get the Peter Saville cover here. He does all their covers. Again, this is the US vinyl edition on Quest. This is the version I have, and as always, I show the versions that I have. Here are the labels. Here's the inner sleeve. And I have this sticker on my cover. I even looked the other day as I was checking it out. I do have this Technique. Beautiful. And a really cool cover. Just, I don't know, the colors, the juxtaposition of the colors on the statue. It's a really striking cover. Very cool. Fits the music very well. Now, I'm going to go back in time and just talk about a couple of the singles that led up to the album. This is True Faith, obviously. This is one of their best songs, in my opinion. They put this out around the time that Substance came out. This is post Brotherhood, pre Technique. But I think it's important to point these songs out. This is the US version. It's important to point out that the singles they put out right before Technique, because they had done those songs with John Roby, like State of the Nation and Shell Shock, which I thought were their worst singles, but then they came back and roared back with this shit, with True Faith, which is, I think a lot of people would argue that this is their greatest song, and I wouldn't argue that. This is a beautiful song, backed with a beautiful B-side, arguably their best B-side, 1963, which became its own single several years later. Excellent song. Just this single is amazing, man. Amazing single. Came with its own inner sleeve. That's a very nice touch. 12 inches that come with its own inner sleeve. Yeah. New Order. True Faith. One of their best. This preceded Technique, as did this, Touched by the Hand of God. Not on the album, single only. Beautiful song, one of their best, Touched by the Hand of God. And a really fantastic and funny video, directed by Catherine Bigelow, I think. That was directed by Catherine Bigelow, right? They all dress up in like cock rock wigs and they pretend that they're in a hair metal band from the 80s. Very funny video and a very cool song. Touched by the Hand of God. These are the songs that we had to our disposal leading up to Technique. There was a real momentum here. I think it's worth mentioning these songs. You know, these were fresh in our mind. This is what we were listening to when this came out. Picture that. 88 and 89 were really magical years for the band New Order. The best. I think 1989 was their best album and their best year and their best period ever. This is Fine Time. Really cool cover. I've always taken this as a symbol for the rave culture. People are getting high, getting stoned, getting wasted, listening to dance music. To me, this is what this is always represented. If I'm wrong, so what? Once you release this cover to the world, it now belongs to me and I get to interpret it any way I want to. And I've always seen this cover as a tip of the cap toward the rave scene. And this has a flurry of pretty good remixes. I think these mixes are pretty good. You get the album version here, you get the shorter radio version. I think the best mixes are these Steve Hurley mixes. Steve Silk Hurley, they call it. These two are the better mixes. In fact, I think they surpass the quality of even the album mix. I think these mixes are really cool. And then Don't Do It, which is like this weird instrumental, almost industrial B-side. Really cool track. Excellent song. There's no reason to not get these 12 inches that come along with the album. Excellent remixes and B-sides all around on all the singles. Nothing but quality B-sides and remixes. Then you get to the best single, the best 12-inch of the album Technique, Round and Round. This is just one of their best songs, I think. Some fantastic remixes. This is the US version. I have 4 or 5 different versions of this. I have a US edition here. I have a Canadian version, which has a different track listing, and I have a couple of UK versions that have a different track listing. You have to have 3 or 4 different versions of this 12-inch, this single, I should say, to have all the versions. This US one's maybe arguably the best because it represents all 3 remixers on one record. You get the Stephen Hague mix, which is amazing. You get the Kevin Saunderson mix, and you'll know him from Inner City. If you like your house music, your early Detroit techno and house music, you know who Kevin Saunderson is. He does this club mix, and then he also does a mix called the Detroit mix, which is on the UK version. A reason to get that UK version. And the UK version has a slightly different cover to this. And then you get the Ben Gross mix of this, which is awesome. And then, of course, the B-side Best in Marsh. Fantastic song, had a really cool video. In fact, you can see a bit of that video here. Basically, the video is just 4 minutes of extremely hot women staring longingly into the camera. New Order knew how to make a video. Great video if you like beautiful women. And I'm assuming most of you do. And if you don't, that's your problem. Anyway, their best single from the album Technique, Round and Round. Really cool cover again, going off of that statue theme. Awesome, the way his hair is highlighted here with orange. Fucking cool cover. Really like this cover. And their third and final single from Technique, very good song. They ended up getting sued by John Denver, of all people. And when you listen to that original John Denver track, you hear, like, it does sound exactly the same. From what I read, they settled out of court and they dealt with it. But I think because of the John Denver lawsuit, this single got a very limited run, no pun intended. I think it was limited as 20,000 copies here. So I don't know. Is 20,000 limited? I guess. When it comes to New Order, that's probably not a huge amount. As you can see, you can get it pretty cheaply still. The median is $13.34. So you're not going to be paying too much if you want this 12-inch. I think it's worth getting. It's a very classy release. Just like most of their 12 inches, you got premium labels. You got a nice inner sleeve to go with it. The remix really isn't that much to speak of. It's remixed by Scott Litt, by the way. You'll know Scott Litt from producing bands like REM and Nirvana. You might have heard of those bands. He does the remixes here. They're all right. They're all right. They're slightly different. They're pretty cool. The real gem here, though, is the B-side here, MTO. And basically you get this is basically an edited version of this minus mix, but this is just an instrumental house track. Really good stuff. Awesome B-side. Just another 12-inch with solid remixes and an excellent B-side. Part of the beauty of the whole Technique era. As you can see, this came out in September. So when did Round and Round come out? I want to say Round and Round came out in April, May of '89. Fine Time came out before the album. So that must have been, December of 1988 that came out. I want to say, it says 89 here. I think maybe the UK one came out in 1988. Maybe not. I don't know. But this came out in September. This wrapped up 1989, their best year run. Awesome 12-inch. And I'm going to show this last one just as a curiosity. I always think of this 12-inch being released in that kind of the tail end of the Technique era. This came out in the spring, summer of 1990. This is New Order in full-on pop mode, unapologetic, unabashed pop mode, top 10, top 5 mode. Did this hit #1 in the UK? This was their World Cup jingle. Those Europeans love their soccer, don't they? And New Order did the World Cup theme for England's team that year. And this is a pretty cool song. I mean, it is what it is. It's like a big, annoying, pop-tastic pop song. Probably New Order has never set their sights on a higher tier pop angle in their lives, and it worked. I think this hit #1 in the UK. Someone please correct me if I'm wrong about this, but I think it did. And it definitely has that Technique vibe. If you were to take this song and try to cram it in to the context of any of their albums, it would be Technique. Although this song stands alone as just an extremely pop song. Arguably the most pop New Order's ever been. And here's the back cover. This has this came out. This is the U.S. edition. This came out on 2 different editions in the UK. Basically, in the UK, it came with this cover, and then it had the original World in Motion version, and then on the B side, I think it was just called the B side. It did have a B side that did not come out here on the US version. And then it had a remix accompaniment that had a more gold cover and it had these remixes on it. And look who's on here. Andy Weatherall. How much do we love Andy Weatherall? You know I love him. I've talked about him several times on my channel. First video I ever did was a Weatherall video. Then you flip it over and you get some Park and Pickering remixes. Quite honestly, not the greatest remixes. Even the Weatherall mixes are okay. This is very early Weatherall. Not the greatest New Order mixes of all time, but it's just a fun song. I include this with Technique because, it came out within that year. But it all comes back here, people, to Technique. My personal favorite New Order album. It's interesting to look at my past New Order videos. I said that Brotherhood was their least interesting in the 80s, but plenty of people said it's their favorite. That's the beauty of New Order, It's we all have different favorites, but for me, it's Technique. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Let me know. I'd be interested to hear about it. But to me, I can't imagine New Order ever overtaking the brilliance of Technique. It is their finest moment, it is their absolute peak, and one of my generally all-time favorite albums, New Order Technique, released in January of 1989. Go listen to it again. Why not? Why not? Have a good day. Happy Labor Day. Later.